I'd love to invite our next panelists to the stage. They are going to be speaking about transforming the CSIOBS campus to prioritize climate resilience and nurturing the next generation. So I see them clustering over there. Would our next panelists like to come join us up on stage?
Welcome to our presentation. It's going to be a combination of what we've learned so far this morning about the science. Now we're going to focus on the science and the education and how we brought together a group of important folks in their own industries, to the table. So let me sort of introduce the team. You'll see me. I think I can see myself up there, and Tolu is over there. Raise your hand, Tolu, and Doug is here at the table, and Joey, who does our climate resiliency work, and then we have members of the team who are here. And I guess I don't have to look back there. I need to look right here. I'm doing it the hard way. We have on the team Identity and Outreach. Sebastian Ebar, Identity and Outreach again, is Aisha Dinsmore Bay. They are doing our work to help lift the narrative around the indigenous people and folks of color. Our landscape architect is here, and that's Shauna Giles-Smith. I'm sorry, guys, I can't see this for some reason. I don't know why. And then Kara Slocum is with Arup. And we have Harry Flamm, who is with Stantec. So they're presenting from the team today, which is this next slide. And then you've heard a little bit about Outward Bound in that amazing Chronicle story. We are part of the Outward Bound Network. There are 9 regional schools in the Outward Bound Network, and we've been part of the Outward Bound Network for about 35 years. And we've had a relationship with the school district of Philadelphia for 50 years. And so the vision of Outward Bound is more resilient and compassionate individuals and a more resilient and compassionate world. And then our mission is, and we just went through a strategic planning process last year, is Kathleen Stone Island Outward Bound mission is to build stronger, more equitable school communities by partnering with public schools to deliver free experiential learning programs to students to boost academic success and foster personal growth. So when this conference was held about 2 years ago, and I was in the audience like you are today, and was listening to all of the conversations about resiliency, and again, the science of resiliency, it spurred me to sort of think about what could we be doing in addition to the education program that we do through Outward Bound? What could we be doing in addition to that around helping our students understand what's going on? And so the last presentation, when they were talking about Cohasset, and so the challenges that, residents have there, we're thinking that that is truly probably in many cases with our students. So how do we help them become the policy makers and the advocates of, climate resiliency? So there are 4 components of our project, and that is deepening programming, that is to work with as many schools as we can, to cultivate partnerships, and so today is part of that cultivation of new partnerships. Building a solid foundation. We want to, in addition to our staff, we also want to recruit, more students of color to come, not only come visit, but also become employees of the organization. And then the last part is modernize the island. So today you're going to hear about what that specifically means. Again, the science and the art and the education of modernizing the island. So this looks like, and this is a 9-month process for us. Looks like we're probably in the 5th or 6th month now, where we're having these monthly meetings to just look at the island in its totality. And thinking about ways in which we can make it more resilient, thinking about ways in which, again, we can make it more educational and more ways for our students and adults who come and have special events on the island can enjoy the island for the long term. So I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Doug Stapleton, who is the Vice President of Asset Management.
Hey, everybody. Like Sylvia said, I'm Doug Stapleton, Vice President of Asset Management. First and foremost, I'm just excited to be here and thankful to be a part of this panel and join you guys today. So as my role as Vice President of Asset Management, what that means is, we're looking at the campus, the buildings, the pathways, the energy systems, and making sure all that is aligned with the mission that we have at Kathleen Stone Outward Bound. So that's looking at the infrastructure not only as a set of assets, but we're looking at it as an extension of our values. So that's going to be equity, resilience, and sustainability. Hold on. So this slide here. So one of the most amazing aspects of this project that we're doing is the fact that we can partner with the Stone Living Lab. The Stone Living Lab is working on very critical issues such as climate adaptation, nature-based coastal resilience, and community-driven science. So what that means in regards to asset management is we're able to take real-time, locally relevant data and use that to help support our mission and our planning process. And again, like Sylvia mentioned earlier, we have a full team that's supporting this. It's not just us up here on stage doing it, along with all the partners that you see listed at the bottom of this slide. This is an aerial shot kind of showing you geographically where the island's located. As you can see, it's located south of South Boston and just across the way from UMass Boston campus as well. We are part of the Boston Harbor Islands National and State Park. Given that we are an island, it definitely lends itself to being a very great learning space and create a great experience for our students. But with that said, we also have our set of challenges, and we are vulnerable to certain areas. Those vulnerabilities are tidal shifts, coastal winds, and rising sea levels. Before we even started the planning process, we really wanted to make sure that we're able to look at to see how people are using the island. So we did this site impressions analysis. And we wanted to make sure that we're looking at it not just as people are using it physically, but also emotionally and intuitively. What the analysis showed is that we have a great foundation, and people generally describe the island as beautiful, energizing, and full of potential. So the good news is we're not starting from scratch. What we want to do is be able to build on our strengths in ways that are inclusive, resilient, and mission-aligned. The island is already inspiring. What we're trying to do is make sure the infrastructure can keep up with the experience. I'm going to pass it off to Harry Flamm now. You should be good now.
Hello, I'm Harry Flamm with Stantec. I'm an architect and sustainability coordinator there, located here in the Boston office. The first part of any project is, I like to think of it as a discovery process. Learning about the client, the community, that was talked about earlier today, about the context. And one of the things that our design team recognized very quickly early on was that we didn't want the work to be just sustainable. We wanted it to be regenerative. How we can make the place not just withstand current impacts, putting up walls to get through the day, but for the future generations of the community, of people that work there, for all the kids that visit the island, and for the island itself. So, instead of sustainability just being, a moment in time, we wanted to give new life or energy and to deliver positive outcomes. And the way to do that is to understand that the island and the people, the natural systems, it's all one living system. And how do we evolve the island with the people together? And that's by looking at different systems within the whole circularity of the place. And that place is not just the island, but it's also the Boston Public School students, it's the boat to get to the island. But within this diagram here, what we're talking about is items like embodied carbon or operational energy or accessibility, community, resilience, biodiversity. Our goal is to not just look at these things separately, but to look how we can synergistically tie things together to get a greater outcome from each component that we advance on. But what we first do is, of course, look at the microclimate. You know, we understand what the wind direction is, the solar access, the topography, hills and dips, and the trees and plants. Just to give us a background, again, this is part of the discovery process. I'll just describe this. Sort of a simple way to apply and correlate what we understand is the use of the island versus how much rain it gets, what the temperature might be, and what the wind speeds might be during a given year. This was just taken from the airport, which is close by to Cathleen Island, for 2023. But one thing we understand about the island is it's not fully occupied all year long. So during the winter, there might just be one person, but in the middle of the summer, it's fully used. But we see how, you know, different temperatures or wind speeds might affect our decisions about what we do in the future. So when we look at the buildings, and there are multiple buildings on the campus, some from the turn of the century all the way up, I think, to the 1970s. Most of them are masonry brick. And again, we're looking at what is the energy usage of the place? Can we cut down on the energy usage and the carbon emissions from those buildings? What building improvements might be needed? Can the buildings withstand hurricane forces or flood rains? And then again, accessibility. Some buildings aren't accessible. The island might not be fully accessible, and to encourage more people with physical challenges to come to the island, that might be one thing that we want to help resolve. And then also interior design improvements. So we're looking at opportunities. And one opportunity might be that we build a new building that encapsulates all the different issues that we do have. An fully accessible building that might capture cooling breezes, so that we don't have to have air conditioning, deep porch overhang so that people can use the outdoor spaces as living classrooms. Items like this as opportunities to, again, expand the use of the island way into the future and to create bigger opportunities for more people to use the place. And then from an energy point of view, we looked at how much energy the island uses. And it's predominantly fueled with electricity. All the buildings are heated with electric resistance heating, which is essentially like heating your buildings with toaster ovens. And the amount of electricity that the island uses, you can see in the thing here, it's equivalent to about 100 Massachusetts average electrical use in about 100 Massachusetts houses. Again, part of that reason is because most houses also use gas, but the island does not use gas, it's just purely electric. But here, an opportunity might be to put in a wind turbine that could generate enough electricity each year to provide 62% of the power of the island. And within 3 years, that can pay back the cost of the turbine and its installation, which again helps the program and the future viability of the program itself. So that's just a quick tour of that. Up next we have Kara, who's going to talk about resilience.
Thanks, Harry. So as we start to lean into the modernization plan, as we identify and lean into a equity and placemaking for the island, it is important to consider the island's resiliency in the face of climate change. So I'm going to speak very briefly on kind of what that process looks like. And my presentation is going to mostly focus on built assets, but the results of the assessment did take into consideration the island as a whole and some of the natural assets as well. So our goal in this analysis is really to provide, a basis for analysis, but also education on climate risks that will enable our stakeholders to make informed decisions on future development, implementation of future buildings or site adaptation strategies, and also connecting the project to funding opportunities related to flood risk, but also adaptation strategy opportunities. So for the Kathleen Stone Island team, we prepared a physical qualitative flood assessment. And this assessment considers really 3 aspects if we were to break it down. Note, I am an engineer, so this is my little equation. We have hazard exposure, which involves the hazard, in our case, which is flooding. So we focused on both chronic and acute flooding that could affect the island, specifically tidal flooding due to sea level rise, as well as extreme storm events. So we looked at the 100-year storm over 3 planning horizons, present day, 2050, and 2070. The second part of the equation would be vulnerability. So this refers to how a certain asset may respond to an exposure, a hazard exposure. And that may be dependent on the location of that asset or the typology of the asset. And then lastly, we get to the consequence. So this involves categorizing the asset based on the hazard exposure and any damages or downtime that it may accrue. So in consideration kind of like these 3 aspects, we can get to what risk may look like at a specific asset on the island. Below, just wanted to highlight some of the processes as part of this assessment process. And starting out, we conducted a site visit to really experience the island, its topography, and its building assets, and really see firsthand any vulnerabilities that we may see, but also in parallel gathered our flood hazard data in order to conduct the analysis. We also reviewed flood history and met with operations and maintenance and staff on site to better understand what flooding had actually occurred already on site and really lean into that as part of our process. And then we conducted the assessment and had a visioning workshop with our stakeholder team to really validate and verify the assessment, but also the vulnerabilities and better understand their risk tolerance to damage and downtime that could accrue or during anticipated flooding on the site. So with this information, we can better produce adaptation strategies in the modernization plan aimed at safeguarding the most vulnerable parts of the island, which we'll get into in the next slide. Following this slide, Shauna is going to be able to speak a little bit more about the site adaptation opportunities, and that flooding doesn't always have to be seen as a negative. But with this information and knowing, where vulnerabilities or flooding could take place in a more chronic, like tidal flooding, we can really lean into the educational opportunities and create a living learning lab on the island. So this is something, this is what our assessment sort of looks like. On the left, you'll see the extents of the 2050 100-year storm, along with some of the key assets that we identified on the island. And then on the right is really our table that goes through our hazard exposure, of our vulnerability, and our consequences to get to a risk score for each of the assets. And so we're hoping that this would be a takeaway for our client team to better understand which of their assets are most vulnerable to flooding at different time frames. So just wanted to note some key key findings of this initial, looking at the island holistically, we found that the island's access routes and the center of the island would be highly vulnerable to flooding. So you can kind of see that this island is going to become two in mid-century as in an extreme storm event. And then another key finding is that the island's main access point, so there's a key dock access, that would be most vulnerable to flooding, and in mid-century could see up to 6.5 feet of flooding, which obviously could pose a risk to how the island operates, knowing that that's the main in and out port. Then zooming in to specific building assets. So due to the topography of the site and the existing structures, a lot of our building assets are actually likely not to be impacted by coastal flooding. So as we start to look at the extents and depths of flooding and proposing new program or new opportunities as far as building assets go, we can better cite knowing what kind of vulnerabilities, low-lying lands or coastal flood risk areas, where they exist and to what depth flooding may occur there. So just wanted to highlight that we found that there were really just 3 assets that were highly vulnerable to flooding, and in actually speaking with staff, flooding had already occurred in these areas. So they were aware that these were vulnerable, and so as we start to shift program or where important pieces of these buildings may go in the future, we can better know the risk at the building asset. So just to summarize, as we lean into advancing an identity and thinking about equity and placemaking at Kathleen Stone Island and as part of this broader visioning process, it is important to understand the island's resiliency in the face of climate change, especially given that it is an island on the coast of Massachusetts, and that this flood assessment and strategic planning really aim to safeguard the island's most vulnerable assets and look for a more sustainable future. So I'm going to hand it over to Shauna, who'll go through some of these opportunities that can come from more chronic flooding that we may see on the site.
Thanks, everyone. So before I switch over here for a second. So when I'm Shauna Giles-Smith, ground landscape architecture. As I was sitting here in the audience earlier today, knowing how close the island is, I thought, really, how close it is. So I sent a message to one of my staff. We're 5,741 feet away from the island, or 1,750 meters. So anybody that's ever run a 1600 or walked a mile, that's how close the island is. It's to the point that we're in right now, which is pretty shocking how close it is, because the experience of an island is being in a completely different place. And within 10 minutes from UMass Boston, you're there. So I don't know how long it takes to swim. I'm not a strong swimmer. Based on this is the island. This is the island that our office modeled. We're landscape architects. We're not scientists like Woods Hole. So this is like a landscape architect modeling it, not really a scientist modeling it. But we took the information that Kara and her team prepared of the impact of sea level rise. This is 2070. And one of the things about the islands is they're part of a drumlin formation. So they're a couple of large hills. And that's why in her, the analysis that Kara was looking at, the middle part was the part that was most subject to inundation, as well as one of the marshes. But one of the things that's really struck me about this is this is a projection of sea level rise in 2070 without a storm surge. But at points of the island in 2070 is entirely intact. So, but there's other points where the center part is quite inundated. And So our job as landscape architects on this project, one of our main jobs, is how do we facilitate the experiential learning that is so much a foundation of the Outward Bound program, and also facilitate the experience of the island in general, experience and enjoyment of it, and adding on to this, the focus on awareness and learning from the island in the context of everyday, but also in the context of climate change. And so the programs that we're looking at, and this is a conceptual vision plan, so the programs we're looking at are possibilities at this point. But we're looking at ways we can facilitate and support existing programs, programs that may come out of shift in pedagogy, and also programs that may arise because of changes in sea level or other factors. And as Kara mentioned, not all are negative. One of the things I thought was interesting about the last speaker is there is an existing food production program on the island. But one of the last speaker mentioned putting food where it can be a feature instead of coming in through the back door. And so one possibility we're looking at is the idea of enhancing that growing program that already exists on the island, but putting it in the front, in an area where it's part of the everyday experience of visitors to the island, so that the whole circle of food, of growing, of harvesting, of eating, and then of composting is part of the experience of the island. And so that, again, you'll see on all of these are potential activities, but that's one of the ideas that we've explored. Another is about enhancing the spaces to gather. At the high season, there are so many different people on the island and different activities going on. And a lot of times, the staff want to go into smaller groups, gathering areas. And some of these may be areas when you just come off the boat and need a place to sort of sit and gather and be oriented. Another might be a place where a larger group, maybe all of the kids that are on the island can be there at one time, and we're just kind of sliding things into the existing topography so that a larger group can gather. But then there's also other potential programs that are building upon the activities such as the kayak program that exists on the island. And it is a very, very important and fundamental program of the island. But is there a way that that the rising sea level or looking at different locations may facilitate a kind of a lesser investment in terms of time, in terms of skill, and in terms of bravery? Because a lot of inner city kids may not be super comfortable going into the open ocean. So is there the possibility of finding places that can allow for a short-term, a short-term experience? And then also, the access when there is a lot of water. So in the middle of the island, there will be times in the future where it will be difficult to go from one place to another. So thinking of lighter touch strategies such as boardwalks that can help get you from one place to another, or can help bring you into a marshland and maybe create a space where there can be a workshop where you can get down into the water, or when it gets higher, sort of launch that short-term kayak. So we're really at this point looking at a number of possibilities, of ideas where we can help support and enhance the programs and lead to new learning and educational and enjoyment opportunities on the island. And I will now hand it back to Sylvia.
Thank you, and I'm just going to sit here. So I hope that we provided to you a very comprehensive way in which we are looking at how to sustain the island for many generations. And I think that the way we're approaching it is really, truly fascinating. And it's kind of like the dream of an urban planner. I think the last panelist is a person who's going to go to urban planning school, so I feel like every day I come in, I'm like, this is exactly, how I kind of envision the space here. But I want to open up the space because we want to give about 15 minutes for questions, for you to ask us questions. But before you do that, I want to acknowledge our colleagues in the room. And so we have Matt Hardy, who is head of our safety on the island. We have Tessa, and if I don't remember your last names, I'm sorry, And Tessa runs our Green Ambassadors program. Next to Tessa is Kelly. And she is part of Matt's team in terms of safety. And then I've already introduced, oops, hey there, Karen, hey there, Natalie. And then over here to my immediate right, we have Rachel, who is our new VP of what we call culture, change, and engagement. We have Rebecca Fader, and Rebecca is our interim chief development officer. And next to Rebecca is Lori, and Lori Gordon is our interim chief finance officer. And Beth is our contract grant writer and data person. So we have quite a few people here that are from from our organization that you should feel free to speak to. And then I want to acknowledge Bob Chin, who was, I met, about 2 years ago on a very, very, very cold day, where we spent a lot of hours on the island, and he, taught me about all of these different ways in which we can look at, again, making our island sustainable. So I hope I have not forgotten anyone else. Someone's pointing. Who else has? Yeah, I called out Joey. Yeah, I did. Yeah, but Joey's here, and actually Joey's fiance is here, and they're getting, not to put his business out there, but they're getting married, around this, Memorial Day weekend was when, so it's happy to see her with us today. But anyway, some questions that you might have about what are we trying to do, why we're trying to do it, does it make sense? How can you get involved? Those are just the things that we're thinking about. Okay.
Hi, thank you so much. Really cool to have you guys as panelists. I'm Maya, I'm with the Charlesville Watershed Association, but I've also been very engaged with the Philadelphia Outward Bound School. So there's no question in my part as to why you guys do what you do, because I feel very much of a product of what you've done. So I think that's been really influential, so I get your whole message. It's interesting to see you guys in Boston compared to Philadelphia. They made their own kind of reservoir area that's beautiful. Took a lot of work and funding, I know. And you have an island, which is crazy, but really cool, and adds so many other things to it. So I guess I have two questions. I'm also engaged with the Boston Public School District, so kind of curious as to how you maybe target to them or even expand out if it's like also kind of greater Boston. And then you also touched on kind of how you're maintaining the island, both mentioning mitigation and then adaptability opportunities. And I'm curious as to know which one you're prioritizing more or if it's synonymous. Thank you.
Yeah, so the first priority going back to the mission is certainly, to supporting students. And we have, in addition, and we didn't talk about this, but in addition to having students come to the island, we also have people do their special events, So we have about 20,000 people, students, adults, who visit the island on an annual basis. And I think there are about 50,000 students in the Boston Public School. So ideally, we'd love to serve every student if that was possible. And that's kind of like what Philadelphia has done with all the ninth graders, with their project. So given that we can't do that, right? But what we can do is we can create collateral, that can support teachers, whether they're in Philadelphia or whether they're in Wisconsin, that can actually broaden our reach. So that's what we are thinking about doing, and that's what we're going to partner with the Stone Living Lab. In terms of the adaptability piece, I'm going to turn that to you guys.
Hello. I can speak to this a little bit. So I would say it's twofold, definitely mitigation and adaptation. In starting to visualize strategies within the built environment and the natural environment, there's definitely we have buildings that we know are vulnerable to flooding. So what does that mean? It's looking at what is in the buildings. Do you raise it in place? Do you armor it? And that's more, structural engineering type things. And then there's marshes and more softscape that will be vulnerable to flooding. And then it's looking at, what Shauna was leaning into. How do we make those places still accessible, but adaptable to that changing climate and the sea level rise? So we've looked at a broad array of approaches, and honestly wish I put that strategy slide in, but happy to chat after too. It's kind of like everything under the sun now. Nothing is a wrong answer yet. It's just about placing it in the right place on site.
And we're very fortunate that the Stone Living Lab has a number of research initiatives going on the island, both nature-based solutions to coastal erosion, some level of protection, looking at an area of compound flooding where there's both rainfall from upland rainfall from the top of the hill that also subject to storm surge. So we're not pretending to be experts of everything. We're also really looking very gratefully and with a lot of curiosity and open eyes to the research that's being done around us.
Hello. I was wondering, I think that the possible silver lining to some of the sea level rise stuff is that it's giving you a direct opportunity to teach kids about the impact of climate change. What are your thoughts on how to integrate that into your education programs and highlight that in a very visceral and physical level to these public students?
Yeah, so like I said, the story from Cohasset is really powerful. In that, how can you help folks get prepared for something that folks don't think is imaginable? I mean, if you think about when the hurricane came in Louisiana, you literally saw bodies, in the water because of the levees that broke, right? And I think someone said here that when, and I did a podcast and kind of compared COVID to what I call climate change, it was climatic because of the way that COVID spread so fast, but then people might not have had second homes to go to. And so when I worked in an organization called Summer Search, we found that COVID impacted their families immediately, and then we found COVID impacted their families afterwards. So the range of deaths that occurred in the middle of COVID and then the post-COVID deaths were really pretty phenomenal. And so working with young people, to helping them understand that there are choices because they know climate change is happening, they see it. And then what can they do? And then can they be at the table as community organizers all the way to being policy makers? And that's how we want to blend. We're teaching them every day about the importance of outward bound, developing friends and peers and, thinking outside the box. How do we now, at the same time, because we have this resource, teach them about, how you can be a part of climate adaptation, if you will, So I'm not a scientist, but I'm learning science from all the folks here. But what I can tell you that, the experience now of having worked with children who were impacted is really driving my motivation to make sure that doesn't happen as it has happened in the past. are the last words. Yeah.
Thank you so much to our two incredible panels. Let's do a big round of applause.